Hello and welcome to English 1301 760 Week 1 module. Today we're going to be looking at our very first module, which is essay number 1, autobiographical narrative. So, why are we taking English 1301? Well, no matter what your college pathway is, everyone has to take English 1301 because everyone needs to be able to communicate, whether you're going to be a doctor or a mechanic or a teacher or a firefighter. Everyone has to be able to write and be able to communicate that. And since this is the beginning, hopefully, of your college journey, you're going to be able to need to write multiple types of essays. So in this course, we're going to be focusing on 4 different essays. We're going to focus on an autobiographical narrative, an evaluation, an analysis, and finally an argument paper. But we're going to start with the autobiographical narrative. So click into essay number 1. We're going to start with some of the features of an autobiographical narrative. So, if everyone has to write this, no matter what your career path is, not just a narrative, everyone has to be able to, well, kind of, everybody has to be able to tell a story. So, in order to write what's going on with a patient, a doctor needs to be able to tell what's happened. Same thing for a nurse. Uh, Engineers often need to be able to look and see what's going on and create a timeline for what's going on. So being able to write in a story, like be able to tell a story or a description, is important. So let's get started. What are the basic features of an autobiographical narrative? Well, here we have them mapped out in a form that we kind of call it color coding. And there are 5 basic features. This has 6. We'll talk about that in just a second, but I like to go with the 5. So basically, you have your introduction, which sets the scene. This is where you're going to introduce characters. You're going to introduce the setting. You're going to have the title. Uh, Basically, it's going to set the tone for the rest of your narrative. And this is kind of, well, if you've ever told anybody what's going on, this is where you go, hey, this is where I was. You've got time, place, people, uh, just everything just sets the setting. The second part of your narrative is going to be the description of the complication. And they use the word complication here in the connotative, actually, the denotative sense of it. Um, Currently, we have a negative connotation of the word complication. That means something bad, usually. But in reality, the denotation of the word complication is simply something that deviates from the norm. So, for example, a complication is anything that changes your day from what it normally is. If I were to win the lottery, that would be a complication that I would probably welcome. Most people would. So it could be something as serious as a flat tire or an accident. It could also be something as not so serious, or maybe not so negative, as maybe winning the lottery or a happy surprise. Something that just deviates from the norm is the kind of complication. So in the second part of your autobiographical narrative, you would describe what's happened, what it is that happened that deviated from the norm that made you want to tell it as a story. So it could be conflict, it could be an adventure, whatever it is. Then you've got the evaluation of the complication. They're awfully big words for saying you're going to talk about what happened after whatever it was that happened. You're going to just talk about whether it needed to be fixed or not, or whether or not other people needed to be involved. You're going to use vivid details to describe what was going on. If you remember a story arc, this is where the story is building up to the highest point of the story, the climax of the story. Uh, and basically, that's where the evaluation of it ends up. Then you have the resolution of the complication. In other words, you have the climax and then what happened? How did it get resolved? Or did it? Uh, this is where you talk about what happened. So the thing that happened and then how everybody reacted to it. That would be the resolution. And it's also, that would be the falling off point after the climax of the story. Then finally, you've got your conclusion where you talk basically about what you learn from the experience, or as some people might call it, the quote unquote moral of the story, although you kind of want to avoid saying that directly because it's a bit cliched. But if you think of telling a narrative like telling a joke, you don't want to put the punchline of the joke at the beginning because that kind of ruins it. The conclusion would be where the punchline would go. Often we call that the thesis statement, but since this is actually a narrative, you don't really want to put the thesis in your introduction for a narrative story. You can, as long as you circle back to it to remind the reader what the whole point of the story was. And that's where you're going to talk about that here. Now, there's an additional one here on this particular form that's called visuals, and often, particularly in autobiographical narratives, they will include a single photo that represents the story or the characters in the story. You don't have to, but you can. It's just one of those things that you may or may not have noticed. It's a visual to help people see what was going on. Now, the reason that a picture is helpful because autobiographical narratives are, by their nature, supposed to be true stories. There's something that happened to a person, hence autobiographical, that actually happened to them. It's not a autobiographical fictional narrative. It's a story about you. So that is the basic features of it. You can review this and read through it at your leisure. Um, also have some special strategies for writing an autobiographical narrative here. Another good PDF, um, making sure that you evoke an appropriate tone, use effective dialogue. When you're asked to write a story, usually there's more than one character involved, more than one person involved in the story. It is possible to have a story where only one person is involved, but at some point you may have some dialogue. So this is very good about helping you to make sure that you write it correctly. Remember, when we write dialogue, when we have two people talking, the proper way to do it in English, grammatically speaking, is that you indent the, a new paragraph every time the speaker changes. And that's what really this is about. I have another bit to show you here about that actually would describe it a little bit better. But make sure you use a specific tone. If your story is lighthearted, you don't want to use a heavy tone. And by the same token, if your story is not lighthearted, you don't really want to use a jovial tone because it just sets the wrong feeling for the story. And that's, we tend to think that maybe there's something underlyingly wrong with somebody who's telling us a story in the wrong tone. So think about your tone. If it's happy, keep it lighthearted. If it's not so happy, um, I mean, you don't have to make it dark and gloomy, but you don't want to make too much light of it. You want to use rich and vivid details. I like to call this lush specificity. The more you can paint a picture for your reader about the story that you're writing about, the better. You want your reader to imagine exactly what you are trying to describe. And it might not be exact, but the more specific and concrete details you can give, the better. For example, here it says, rather than say you went to the hospital, say you went to the Mild Bluff Medical Center. Now, will everybody know where that is or what it looks like? Absolutely not. But it will give them a little bit more of a descriptive detail than just saying I went to the hospital and then somebody just imagines some gray box type building. But if you give them some detail, they might recognize it and they might know exactly what you're talking about, which will make that more interesting to that reader because they can picture it exactly in their mind what it looks like. And even if they can't, even if they don't, it does give them a better idea of something other than just something plain. You want to include all the five senses when you are describing things. Was there a particular smell? Was there a feel? What was the temperature? Uh, was there a particular noise that was going on? These are all things that help give detail and depth to your story. Use figurative language. Uh, Similes and metaphors are great, but instead of saying, it says here, like instead of saying it tasted like tin, it tasted like I was sucking on a penny, which no, I don't recommend, but I think pretty much all of us can kind of get the idea of what that tastes like. Instead of just saying I went out and stood in the grass, you can describe the grass as verdant, green lushness that was under my feet. Uh, that's basically the difference. Now, do I recommend that always? No, only if it's appropriate, but usually it is a good idea to give more details. The more details you can give, the more you can make that your reader feel like they were there with you, the better. One other thing I would say about writing an autobiographical narrative, when you're telling a story, be sure that you're writing in the past tense because good stories are always told in the past. If it happened to you already, then it was in the past tense. Be sure it is the past tense and not the past perfect tense. You don't want to write a story where you are describing things as if they are happening right now, even though they already happened to you. For example, rather than say, the alarm clock goes off, I get up, I put my shoes on, I walk to my car, I go to work. That's the past perfect. It's very difficult to write a good story in that particular tense. Instead, you should use past tense. I woke up that day at 5 o'clock. I got up out of bed. I got ready for work. I left for work in my car. There's a difference in the way the tone is. There's a different in using all of the past tense words. So make sure that you're writing in past tense when you're writing a story. Uh, this is a great video. I would show it to you here, but I don't want to make this lecture too long, so you can watch this video on your own. I highly recommend it. It's called What's the Most Important Element of a Good Story? It's really short, and it's members of basically industry, the entertainment industry, talking about what makes a good story. It's writers, producers, uh, other executives, etc., talking about what makes a good story. And I think they have some really good ideas in there that you should think about. Here, as promised, is the other document that talks about how to format narrative dialogue and speaker tags. Again, I will let you read through this because I don't want to waste your lecture time with just reading this word for word. But this talks about how we use dialogue and the reason why. If you notice here, where every time someone changes, the speaker changes, it's indented 5 spaces. This is a visual cue to let people know that the speaker has changed. What we have here, that's called the dialogue tag, where it says John said or Diane said. And that's just telling us exactly who's saying what. But if you notice, we drop the tags often in stories and books when we're reading because we can. Because if this is John who's talking here, then we've got a new indentation and it changed to Diane, then we have a new indentation again. That means it's gone back to John. And then we have yet a different indentation. That means it's gone back to Diane. And then we have another one where it's Diane's daughter. So every time you see the indentation like this, that means the speaker has changed. And you'll want to do that too in your writing. Every time someone else says something, like if you were talking about something you said and then somebody answers you, you would indent whatever their answer was when you're writing dialogue. Now it's a little bit tricky. Um, there are some great videos out in the world, in the wild, that you are welcome to take a look at that talk about how to write narrative dialogue. I don't think it's going to be as important, although, like I said, it's just very likely that you may have dialogue in your story, and that's fine. Finally, there's information about how to set up your paper properly in MLA format. This will be something that we'll be going over again next week, but you're welcome to take a look at it here. If you're unsure, you can ask the Writing Center, but there are videos there that tell you walk you exactly through how to set it up in MLA. And I have an entire folder in the writing resources about how to set up MLA. So let's talk about the assignments for this week. And all of these assignments will be due on Saturday. And I know that seems like a lot for this first week, but it's really only about 4 assignments. And the first one doesn't really count because it's the email that you're going to send to me about the syllabus. But with the shortened time frame for this particular class, we have these many assignments due this week, and then next week will be week 2. We'll be focusing on your first paper. So you'll be writing a paper basically every 2 weeks. So let's take a look. So you've got the email with the syllabus acceptance, which super easy. You need to go read the syllabus, tell me you accept it, send me an email from your official Sanjak email. There is nothing to turn in here. You're simply going to do that, and then I will use this to put your grade there once I've received your email. The second assignment for the week is an introduction to reading. Now you need to make sure that you go into our important class links hub here and sign in to our textbook, the Norton Field Guide for Writing. And it was going to automatically log me in because I've logged into this before, but it will give you the opportunity to enter your information, and you need to go ahead and do that, and then it will bring you to the table of contents for our book, which is this, the Norton Field Guide to Writing with Readings. Now, for our assignments, I have linked the exact chapter that you'll need to go to for that. So when our first 2 chapters we're going to read are chapters 1 and 2. First chapter is writing in academic context. The second chapter is reading in academic context. These are really short chapters. For example, this is pages 3 to 10, so that's 7 pages. This is pages 11 to 25, that's like 10 pages. But when you look at it, this is what they look like because it's electronic. So it's really just kind of like reading through a website. And there's a lot of extra stuff here that you can click on if you'd like. But really, I'm really interested in you reading through the first chapter. Uh, and I think this is actually a second part. Uh, it's actually a different chapter. So that's chapter 1. And then you can click on chapter 2. It'll take you to the same kind of thing. What you're going to do as you're reading through these chapters is you're going to write 3 questions or comments or any combination of those for each chapter. So you'll have a total for this particular assignment of 6 questions or comments. So you'll be sure to submit it here. And remember, you have to click, once you click on the assignment, you have to click on the instructions for the assignment in order to see all of this information. That's our second assignment, really, after the email. The next set is chapters 7, 8, and 9. Again, They will be linked here, or you can go in the class hub directly to the textbook and read chapter 7, 8, and 9. Again, it's not as many pages as you'd think. This is really one page is chapter 7, chapter 8 is 2 pages, and chapter 9 is all of 5 pages. So actually 4 pages. So in total, you have maybe 10 pages for this particular assignment. Again, you're going to write 3 questions or comments or any combination for each chapter. So for this particular assignment, there'll be 9 questions or comments. Uh, let's see. Our most important assignment is going to be our discussion board beyond the introduce yourself discussion board. And this is called Phantom Limb Pain, and it is about an autobiographical narrative and its meaning. So this particular assignment will count for the attendance for the week. We do attendance by assignments, so be sure to always look for that so that you can be counted as present. So if we click into this, it's going to take us to the discussion directly. And this is the story I would like for you to read. You have to click over here to the 3 dots to download it. It's a really short story. It's a really good story. It's an excellent example of an autobiographical narrative that has a lot of uh, descriptive language in it, and he tells you a lot of information in a very short time space. But I want you to read through Phantom Limb Pain, and then you're going to respond to 2 of the following questions. There's 3 questions. You only have to respond to 2 of them, but your response should be a solid paragraph per question. So uh, it says 150 to 200 words, about so. Answer the question fully and in complete sentences. But you're going to pick 2 questions. And here's some guidelines for you to think about the story. Avoid plot summary, focus on how the story works. You're going to, once you've made your initial post, you're going to then respond to 2 classmates' posts, and it should be a substantial response, not just, yeah, I agree. Okay. Make sure that you can say, I agree, but you need to explain why you agree. And don't just tell them that, oh, that's a great idea or that's really smart. That's cool, but you need to say, why is it smart? Why is it a good idea? Remember, your goal is to extend the conversation. Why we're reading this particular one? Well, again, it's a great example of an autobiographical narrative. And because you'll be writing your own autobiographical narrative, I'd like for you to see what you can do with it. So it's got, so this essay shows that strong narratives focus on meaning, not just events. It uses specific details, it trusts the reader to make some connections, and you end with a reflection, not just a conclusion. In other words, a reason why he wrote the story. So be sure to read through this. Again, it's a great example, and it's definitely the first sort of substantial assignment for us. And it's going to count for attendance, so be sure to do it. Let's see. I have yet another reading assignment in the book, and this one is not exactly a chapter, but it's part of a chapter, and it's personal narratives, uh, a brief guide to writing. So this will take you to basically some ideas about how to start writing your own personal narratives. What you should do, consider the significance, think about what happened. What I'm going to ask you to do, and we'll look at this assignment in just a second, despite the fact that we're going to go over it again for next week, you're going to be choosing a significant event that happened to you, something that I would hope would affected you positively. I'm hoping it's a positive event, but it doesn't have to be. If it's an event that you feel like you would like to talk about or write about, that's fine. Know that no one else is going to read these stories except for me. This is your personal information. It stays with me and between you and me, and that's it. Which is why we are I'm not having us do peer reviews or anything like that on this. Um, so I'm not asking you for deep, you know, informational stories, but if you feel comfortable writing about it, then that's up to you. Um, I'm really just looking for something that you are comfortable writing about because it's easier to write about something that you want to write about. Positive, like I said, is usually better because often it is easier to write about positive things. And we're trying not to make this as hard as possible. So be be sure to choose carefully. It could be anything from anything that's actually happened to you. It does have to be something that actually happened to you. So please don't try to write a fictional story. Um, it's actually harder than you think it is. Please don't use AI to write a story about you. That's completely not within the spirit of what we're trying to do here. So, but this chapter should help you with writing a personal narrative. It's got a lot of good ideas, ways to organize them, how to start at the end to tell what the story came about. You can start it from the beginning in chronological order. You can start at the end. You can braid it together like two different storylines. You could start in the middle of the action. For example, if anybody's ever seen the movie Deadpool, the movie starts literally in the middle of the action of what's going on with that movie, right? The credits and everything at the very beginning, it's right in the middle of Deadpool finding Ajax. So that's one way you can do it. And I would not worry too much about these more ways to approach a personal narrative. These are different ways to do that, but not for this assignment. For this assignment, I really would like for you to write a story, not write a letter or do a photo essay or anything like that. You are writing a story. Uh, but this is otherwise good information. And that's what this assignment is basically, again, the three questions or comments. Um, and those are the assignments that are outside of the actual narrative. This is the instruction for the actual narrative, and it's in no fewer than 750 words. In other words, it has to be at least 750 words. Now, before you freak out, that's really not that many words. And I find that most people write anywhere from 1,000 to 1,200 words on this particular essay because it's really just more about you writing it. Have a minimum because I have to, but I really wouldn't worry too much about it. Just write the story and then we'll think about it. So you're going to write an autobiographical narrative in which you focus on a situation you had to deal with. I'd like for you to keep the time frame for the narrative within a span of 24 hours. In other words, something that happened to you, you want to focus on a moment in time, not a full span. So, for example, if you went on a vacation and it was a 2 week vacation, you're not going to write the narrative about the entire 2 week vacation. You're going to write about something that happened to you on the 2 week vacation, something that happened one day, one event, basically. So, and you don't have to write it in a 24-hour period, like the entire 24 hours, just something that happened within a 24-hour period. If we focus down on that, it kind of makes it easier to really give some good specific details about a particular moment. So there is an example, and I'll show you those in the recommended readings of other autobiographical narratives other than just the Phantom Limb Pain, which we'll be reading. So you're going to integrate the basic features of the autobiographical narrative, the color-coded chart that is here on our blackboard. And remember, you're trying to tell a story. So your story should have a point or quote unquote a punchline. So it's going to be evaluated on the following criteria. How well you've integrated the basic features. In other words, you've kept to your basic storytelling uh, format. How well the story uses effective strategies, effective tone, dialogue, and rich and vivid details. Again, part of that effective tone is telling it lighthearted if it's a happy story, maybe not so lighthearted if it's not. Uh, but also using the correct tense. This is where past tense comes into play. Using past tense is probably your best bet here. How well your story uses clear, coherent, complete, and correct sentences. Make sure you're writing complete sentences. Try not to use any type of creative writing type writings. I know it's very popular right now to write in short, stunted sentences. Um, and while this is probably the only place you'd be able to do that in this particular semester or course for this, it's still not it's still an academic essay. It's still a formal academic essay. You can use curse words if it's appropriate for your characters. I don't want gratuitous curse words to be used just because you could. Uh, but if it's in keeping with the character, then you should write the character. If the character has an accent, you should write the character that way. I hope that makes sense. But try to use complete sentences. Um, it's going to be actually way more important for the other essays we're going to write. But coherent, that's really more important. You're going to also be graded on how well the story conforms to MLA format and uses correct punctuation, spelling, and word choice. A lot of people get really upset because they think that content is more important than the format, and sometimes that's true, but this is a learning how to write class, and the format is just as important as the content. So keep that in mind. A properly formatted paper will be a joy to read, even if its content is not very good. However, if you hand me a wonderful story full of great content and it's poorly formatted, I'm not going to want to read it. And that already biases me against looking at it. So set yourself up for success by formatting your paper correctly because it's literally the one thing that you have absolute control over. Not formatting a paper correctly is a choice, and you will be rewarded for those choices that you make with the grade that you earn. The word count is required at the end of the paper, finally. That's the last thing. So, for example, if you write 800 words, put 800 words. If you write 754, put 754. If you write 749 words, put that on there. This is more for you. I want you to realize how many words you're writing, but I do want this word count on your paper. So please be sure to put it on there. And don't think that you're going to fudge it. It's not like a personal challenge. I can always find out how many words you've written. That's not that big a deal. But I want you to acknowledge it and put it on there and let me know that you did. And then you're going to submit your autobiographical narrative in the submission link, which is right here where it says autobiographical narrative submission link. And again, we'll be going over more writing and MLA formatting next week. So this week, let's just focus on these first 5 assignments and start thinking about the story that you want to tell. As always, if you have any questions, be sure to email me and have a great week.